Why is it that sometimes you actually have a lot you could say about hurt, confusion, things that matter deeply to you, yet when the moment comes, you suddenly choose silence instead? Why is it that when people misunderstand you, reinterpret your intentions, or even define your feelings for you, you no longer explain the way you once did? You don't clarify. You don't push to be understood. You simply grow quieter, almost as if none of it matters anymore. And why is it that the quieter you become, the more others start assuming you're distant, detached, or indifferent, while only you know the truth? It's not that you stopped feeling. You've just become less willing to hand those feelings over. If any of this feels familiar, then today isn't about teaching you how to be more outgoing, forcing yourself to speak up, or pretending nothing ever hurt. What we're going to unpack instead is a psychological pattern that often goes misunderstood. Why some people gradually learn to become silent, and when silence stops being just quiet, when it turns into protection, is it creating distance or quietly helping you survive inside your relationships? You may recognize a moment like this. You explain something sincerely, maybe offering a different opinion in a meeting or sharing your feelings in a relationship. But instead of curiosity or understanding, what comes back is interruption, dismissal, or a casual line like, "You're overthinking." You don't necessarily go silent right away, but your body remembers. Psychology shows that when expression repeatedly leads to negative outcomes, the brain starts forming conditioned associations. It begins predicting risk. So the next time you want to speak, your system quietly asks, "Is this worth it? Is this safe?" Many forms of silence aren't personality traits. They're learned responses, especially in ongoing relationships or workplace environments. If speaking up often leads to tension, misunderstanding, or subtle embarrassment, your nervous system naturally tries to conserve energy, say less, lower exposure, reduce risk. Over time, silence stops being a strategy. It becomes your default position. Others may interpret that as distance or emotional coldness. But what's really happening is simpler. You've learned that not every expression will be received with care. And once that lesson settles deeply, silence doesn't feel like suppression anymore. It feels like calm, rational self-protection. When expressing yourself stops leading to connection, the brain rarely keeps trying indefinitely. It adapts. Psychology often describes this shift as emotional withdrawal. Not a sudden decision, but a gradual adjustment. You may notice it quietly happening. You share less about work stress. You explain misunderstandings less often. Even in close relationships, your expression becomes more minimal. From the outside, it can look like composure. Inside, however, your system is calculating risk. The nervous system has a simple goal: reduce emotional cost. Research suggests that when people feel their expression doesn't change outcomes, the brain reduces emotional investment to avoid repeated frustration. This is protection, not indifference. It resembles what psychology calls learned avoidance. Not because you don't care, but because you once cared deeply. Distance then starts to feel stabilizing. In the short term, it works. Fewer conflicts, less misunderstanding. Emotions feel quieter, but the cost is often subtle. Connection gradually weakens. Expressive ability grows rusty. Relationships remain safe, yet emotionally surface level. It's not that you don't want closeness. It's that your brain remembers. Closeness hasn't always felt safe, and understanding that is often the first step toward rediscovering your voice. Sometimes silence isn't something you choose. Your body chooses first. You may have experienced moments like this. You have something to say in a meeting, but the words suddenly stall. Or during a conflict, you clearly feel something inside, yet your throat tightens and nothing comes out. It's not that you lack thoughts, it's that expression suddenly doesn't feel safe. Neuroscience often links this to a survival response known as the freeze response. When the nervous system senses emotional risk but sees no safe way to fight or escape, it lowers visibility, speech reduces, movement softens, expression gets postponed. This isn't weakness, it's your system prioritizing safety, especially if past experiences taught you that speaking up led to conflict, rejection, or emotional overwhelm. The brain raises its alert threshold. So even when the current environment is relatively safe, your body may still follow old maps. You think of what you wanted to say hours later, or only process your emotions when you're alone. Many people assume this is a communication problem. Often, it's a safety problem. When safety increases, expression usually returns naturally. So silence doesn't always signal distance. Sometimes it simply means right now stability matters more than expression. Silence can genuinely reduce harm. Say less, and conflict may decrease. Reveal less emotion, and the risk of misunderstanding seems lower. In the short term, this is effective regulation. Many people adopt it in high-pressure workplaces. You stay professional, composed, focused on function rather than feeling. Interactions appear smooth. Efficiency may even improve. But relationships have one basic requirement. Connection needs information flow. When expression consistently shrinks, others only encounter the functional version of you. They see the colleague, the partner, the friend, but less and less of your internal experience. Over time, relationships can shift into a stable but emotionally distant mode. Research in relationship psychology suggests limited emotional sharing often correlates with lower relationship satisfaction. Not necessarily because conflict increases harm, but because understanding decreases. There's also an internal cost. If expression stays reduced long enough, you may start losing clarity about what you actually feel or want to say. Emotions get simplified, needs get postponed. Silence begins as protection, but when it becomes a long-term pattern, it can quietly restrict connection. Not because you don't value relationships, but because your system once learned safety sometimes feels more urgent than closeness. And recognizing that tension is often the first step toward reopening space for expression. By this point, you may be starting to see your silence a little differently. It may not be coldness, it may not be indifference. It might simply mean that at some point, you spoke honestly, and it wasn't received with care. So your system learned a quieter strategy. Protect first. There's nothing wrong with that. The difficulty is this. Even when environments change, the nervous system often keeps using old maps. You may still speak a little less, observe a little more, leave extra space in relationships just in case. That isn't a flaw. It's a trace of experience. Psychology consistently shows that emotional safety rarely comes from forcing expression. It usually develops through new relational experiences, being listened to without interruption, expressing something vulnerable without conflict escalating, sharing honestly without it being used against you. Small moments like these gradually update the system. You don't need to suddenly become outgoing. You don't need to push yourself open. Expression usually expands naturally where safety accumulates. Like muscle recovery, it doesn't happen through one intense effort, but through steady, tolerable repetition. And perhaps what matters most is not speaking more, it's slowly confirming. Are the relationships around you safe enough for your real experience to exist? When safety grows, silence often loosens on its own. Not because you force change, but because expression no longer equals risk. This is happy psychology. May understanding bring healing, and healing create space for growth. See you next time.